As an IS auditor, you should understand some of the principles and a few tools involved in project management. And we even talked about earlier how the IS audit team will have a project manager manage the audit itself. So let's talk about project management and just a few of the tools that are very common to project management. When we talk about project management, we have to also look at project governance. And project governance basically provides the ownership and the oversight of the whole project. Who is in charge of this whole thing? Who's governing this project? And it won't just be the project manager, because often the project manager, I'll tell you a story with project management. Project management, sometimes you're not in complete control of the people you're working with. You have to negotiate or coax people into cooperating with you. You have to coax department heads into loaning resources and people to you. And so often there's a negotiation process. You can't just simply tell people, you. Sometimes you don't have direct control over the people who work with you. And so it can be quite a problem sometimes trying to keep something on track when you're not in direct authority over the folks who work with you. So with project governance, we want to make sure that the project has oversight and ownership. We need to know who the stakeholders of this project are. Everyone from the project sponsor, the person who's paying for this thing, could be the CIO, could be some executive, whoever the executive sponsor is, whoever's paying for this whole thing, all the way down to the individuals who are going to be doing the data entry, running this thing, using this thing, and the customers, if it involves external customers or other kinds of customers, how their experience will be improved by this. It's all about improving people's experience and productivity. And so part of this is also going to be defining the relationships of all the stakeholders. You will find that stakeholders will be at odds, and some will even be hostile to each other, or they'll have opposing needs. And I remember one time on one project, the project manager was just bemoaning. He was saying, God, I wish I didn't have to constantly deal with competing interests. And that's just a reality of project management. You will have competing interests. And so that's why it's so important to make sure this is the scope. There is a project sponsor who is paying for this thing. There's ownership and governance that are ultimately going to say, folks, thanks for all your input. We're doing it this way. And you need to have a relationship with everybody here, because ultimately you can't whip them into doing what you need. You need to work with them so that they give you the best performance as you're going through this whole thing. And you're going to also need to properly assign resources. Most project management tools allow you to actually specify who's working for how long on what. So you'll know if people are underutilized, if they're overutilized. I mean, there have been plenty of times when I've seen, oh, so-and-so is 110% utilized, okay? And so you can see who is actually assigned to what. One of the difficulties is estimating how long does it really take for somebody to do something. Because you can have 3 perfectly competent people to do a specific task, but one person is blazingly fast. Another person is a lot slower, but the slower person is very accurate, whereas the blazingly fast person, you have to keep checking their work. So knowing how to estimate time, you can have worked in an industry for years and still not be very good at estimating time, just because the variables, it takes so long to understand the variables, and it's through no fault of your own. So with project governance, we need to be able to control this project. The mechanisms for project governance, of course, you're going to have senior management and you need them behind you. You need them on board to basically say, folks, this is how it's going to be. Then there's also the management of the users. You'll have the project steering committee. You'll have the project sponsor, the person who's paying for this, CIO or whatever executive it is. You'll also have the team that actually develops the system or the application. You'll have a project manager who basically, project manager's job is to just keep it all on track and on budget as best as possible, making sure that the resources are utilized effectively. You'll have the development project team, you'll have the user project team, you'll have the IS audit officer, you'll have a security officer who should be involved every step of the way to make sure that security risks are always mitigated and dealt with and accounted for and not introduced or ignored. I have to tell you, with software development, almost always it's quick, we got to get it out, we got to get it to market, we promised this, we've got to get it in production. And the developers are just so busy just trying to make it work. They don't have time to be testing for, to set whatever parameters to limit buffer overflows, or to check for this, or to remove backdoors they've created. And so you need the information security officer always involved to make sure that nobody's forgetting anything, nobody's overlooking anything. And then, of course, quality assurance the whole way. The quality assurance team, every step of the way, we know that we're adhering to whatever our procedure or specification is, to know that we have quality assurance all the way through, from the beginning to the end. Now, let's take a look just really quickly at some common project management practices and tools. First thing, of course, is that we have to deal with the budget. What's it going to cost? So you have to maintain and manage that budget. You have to schedule resources, establish your time frame, establish your schedule. I can't tell you how many times, in fact, in large organizations, you'll be astounded to know that actually most projects don't meet their target. Most projects are over time, over budget, and actually most projects fail, to be quite honest. However, I want to tell you the secret. Here is the secret of project management. The project was successful if the client thinks so. You can put out something where everyone's going, oh, that is the worst thing. Oh, we lost so much. We had all these negative things happen, but there's all this hype, and the client is pleased. If the client is pleased, you're successful. That's the bottom line. If the person who's paying for it is not happy, doesn't matter how fantastic this product is, how well you did it, how under cost, under time, if they're not happy in the end, you didn't succeed. So the success of project management is the project success is successful when the client thinks it's successful. And that really is the bottom line of project management success. So let's take a look at some methodologies. Let's look at CPM, critical path methodology. Let's take a look at Gantt charts and PERT charts, just in quick overview, so you understand in general what they do and how they work. There are whole classes and whole tools on how to create and use these things. And there are free ones as well as paid versions. And let's talk a little bit about time box management. This here is a sort of typical example of critical path methodology, CPM. And what you're looking at is major activities and how long it will take to accomplish major activities. And CPM is based on a concept of what is the longest pathway of activities. Now, some projects are just, we do one thing, then we do the next, then we do the next, then we do the next, and we're done. But others are, we do one thing, when that's done we can branch off and do two more things and another thing. And so you've got several branches, several paths going simultaneously. In the CPM method, we're identifying all of these things that we're trying to do, these activities, and the pathways. The pathway that takes the longest time total, that's called the critical path. There are other sort of side activities that are going along that may take less time. If you've got sort of a group of side activities that go like this, and this ends up taking the longest, then this becomes the critical path. And it's all about managing the critical path and figuring out what is causing a drag or a delay on this project. So if we analyze this a little bit here, we start with activity A. And all of these activities are listed like A, B, C, and we can see several pathways in this. We're showing time to complete each activity as well as the dependencies, like after we're done with A, which will take a duration of 10 days. And then usually with CPM, you show the earliest start and finish times and the latest start and finish times. So the earliest and the latest for the very first activity will be the same thing. So activity A has a duration of 10 days. The earliest is start on day 1. The latest is finish. The latest is start on day 1. The earliest is start on day 1. Finish earliest and latest on day 10. When that's done, and so this thing adds length to the project, or a drag of 10 days. Once activity A is done, we can move to activity B, but we can also start on activities F and H. Now, activity B is a 20-day activity. And usually in the critical path, you don't have any spare time to mess around. So the earliest and latest we can start and finish is day 11 and day 30, and it's 20 days. But for activity F, because when you add F and G together, and F and G, when we finish F and G, for the whole project to be finished, for the final rollout, post-implementation, whatever this thing is, we have to have all three paths come together to feed before we can start the final thing. So like maybe this critical path is development of the software, while this path on top is preparing the infrastructure, and the path on the bottom is educating users. I mean, these are just examples. So by the time we're ready to actually roll out activity E, G, D, and H all have to be done. Notice here that we've got this concept of a TF, the total float. The float is the amount of spare time you have to get started later. Like, so for example, if going along this path of all these activities has a total of 10 plus 20 plus 5 plus 10 plus 20 days, and it adds up to something, but if you go along this path, it's only 15 and 5 days, you've got a spare amount of time. You've got a float of 15 days. So for activity F, you can start right on the next day, day 11, or you've got 15 whole days before you can start. So with CPM, we know how much slack time we have, how much spare time before we've got to keep going. If we take too long, then maybe one of these alternate activities now becomes the critical path because it has the longest drag on the entire project. So this is the concept of critical path methodology. Next thing we're going to look at is Gantt and PERT charts.